First of all, welcome to week 5. We only have one more week after this week and we're done. So I'm looking forward to getting to the end of this, as I'm sure you are. But it's been a fun journey so far. I've been really pleased with the progress that you guys have made. And so we're going to continue on. And in this week, in week 5, we're going to be looking at the building blocks of government. So basically, those things that make government government, and the processes that exist within that framework. So for example, you'll be learning about different kinds of legislatures. You'll learn about the parliamentary system versus the presidential system. You're going to learn about how Congress works, how the federal bureaucracy operates, what executives do, and sort of the process of what presidents do versus what prime ministers do. You're going to learn a little bit about the court system and how it's structured, and basically why it's important that we have an infrastructure, and whether it's a presidential system or a parliamentary system or any governmental system, why they need to have an infrastructure in place. So I'm looking forward to that, and we're going to jump into this and into the PowerPoints right now. So here we go. Well, as I said, we are this chapter is really focused on looking at those building blocks that make governments government. And so with that, as we move into it, we're going to step in and take a look at all the different aspects that make the systems what they are and how they operate. So let's move in and take a look at this. So, again, our objectives are to sort of understand the various roles and levels of government and how they operate within themselves and how they serve each other, and then also to address why they're so important to all of us, meaning the national, state, and local communities that we live in. So in that, obviously the structure of our government is set up by the Constitution. That's where the framework comes from. The founding fathers did a very good job of laying out the principles and what it is, how it is we're supposed to exist and operate, and including the checks and balances that are supposed to exist within both or all the various types of governmental systems. Um, it breaks down the divisions of government. So basically, we talk about the federal bureaucracy, which you'll see in just a little bit, and the roles that are divided, the roles and responsibilities that are set up between all the various levels from within the federal government, the framework that's set in place, but also between the federal and the state, and the state and the local, and the federal and local governments, and how they all operate, where the checks and balances are, who has authority given any situation, whether it be a crisis or event that takes place, who has authority. And so the idea that the federal government has sovereignty over everything isn't really necessarily true. Certainly, constitutionally, the supremacy clause in the Constitution says that the federal government supersedes all state constitutions and state laws. However, there are mandates within the states where the states have more power in some areas than the federal government does. Again, we're going to be examining both the presidential and parliamentary systems, and then to ask the question, is there one better than the other, or is there a one size fits all? And you'll see that many people suggest that the parliamentary system is a much better way to operate a system. Okay, the roles of elected officials and political leaders, and they're very different. So elected officials are those that we elect into office. Political leaders can be those that lead political parties or lead political issues or social issues that are relevant to the people, that may not be elected, but that are appointed that are outside of government. Uh, and for example, Martin Luther King was a political leader. Jesse Jackson, Cesar Chavez, Gloria Steinem. You could go through a litany of individuals who have led various movements, political movements, whether it be civil rights, women's rights, uh, and so the rights of people of color, from like Cesar Chavez with the farmers movement. Um, so we have lots of people outside of government who have played an active role in swaying the government to do what it innately should be doing anyway. And so, we'll look at the role of women in government and how that has evolved over the last, 30 or 40 years. And ironically, we've had other countries in the world that have already had female presidents or leaders, and we are a bit behind the schedule here in the United States. But hopefully, in my lifetime and in yours, we will see that change. Okay. Some of the key terms that you'll be using or understanding this particular chapter. They'll learn what politics, the nature of politics, the nature of governance, what the executive is, the role of the executive, the legislative branch and the judiciary branch, and the checks and balances that are in place to make sure that not one branch can overtake the other branches or usurp power over the other branches. So when we talk about, setting up the constitutional framework, what are we talking about? Well, when we're talking about, it's really the clauses within the Constitution that set up the organizational framework that allows the government to operate. And so there are multiple clauses and aspects and legalese within the Constitution and its provisions that allow for the operation of the government. Um, a lot of these are set up again through the framework of the Constitution. And, we have like the 13th, 14th, 15th, 15th Amendments certainly set up the infrastructure for the rights of the people in relation to the government. Uh, we have laws that dictate how property is to be divided and the rights of people who own land. Uh, we have various quotas, political quotas across various sectors of our society. We have special measures that are put in place by the Constitution that allow for a framework to allow people to have access to various goods and services within, or societal services within the government. We also, of course, even to be able to become a citizen, we have provisions to allow for people who want to become citizens of the United States to become citizens of the United States. We have laws that dictate how human rights and how we treat one another. These are all set up by virtue of the framework of our Constitution. Most of it's written, some of it's also unwritten. Um, and then we have, when we talk about different systems of political systems, we have unified systems versus dual systems. And you'll see here in a second, and I'll explain both of them to you. In the unified system, basically you have one single leader. So the United States basically is a unified system. We have one president, and the president is the head of state of our government and the head of our government. And then in a dual system, usually those are reside within parliamentary systems. Usually you'll have a president. Generally speaking, they may or may not call that person that. They may call them a chancellor or they may call them the prime minister. And then they'll also have a head of government. So they have two separate entities, one that is the head of state, one is the head of government. Sometimes, like in Germany, for example, they have what the chancellor and you have a president. One is responsible for domestic politics, meaning the politics of inside of Germany. The other one is responsible for the international affairs of the country. And many would argue that that's probably that as complex as the world is today, that maybe that might be a better way of governing as opposed to having one person trying to focus on all the various entities or things that reside within a government that the president has to focus on. So when you think about it, perhaps it may make sense. Very rarely has it been the case that we've had presidents that are good at both domestic policy and foreign policy. In the last 50 years, you could pretty much go down the list, and presidents are either good at one or the other, and usually not good at both. And maybe because time is for us to determine whether we need to reevaluate that and maybe take a closer look at the possibility of having an individual who is responsible for each aspect of it. Certainly, remember, as I said, the reason I bring that up and say that is because it really has a lot to do with, you know, that the Constitution and the infrastructure of political systems is constantly evolving. Governments evolve, and so the world is a much more complex place today than it was 100, 200, 300, 250 years ago. Then perhaps we have to recognize that and be able to adjust our political infrastructure to address or deal with those changes. Okay, so in presidential systems, which is what we live under, we have a president, and the president is popularly elected through the Electoral College. That means that the popular vote through the Electoral College determines the amount of electors per state. And as I think I've said before, each state has a certain amount of electors, which is based on the number of representatives in your state. So California is a big state, it has a lot of representatives, so we get a certain amount of Electoral College votes based on that. It's about 54 based on population, typically around 54 districts and 54 representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives, which means we get 54 Electoral College votes. That's pretty typical for us. And some states have almost none. So it depends on your population and the number of representatives you have in your House of Representatives in Congress. And you can see here, I think it's an interesting stat that there have been 27 women presidents from 22 countries, and yet the United States is not one of those as of yet. So hopefully that will change in the near future, and we'll get a chance to see the evolution of the system and the role of women in our system. Even though they have taken on major roles in many cases, we have yet to see a woman be president. And Hillary Clinton got pretty close, but that was not to be. So hopefully we'll see someone in the near future step into that role. So in the parliamentary system, I guess there's usually, and this is usually known as a dual system, we have a prime minister, and the prime minister, unlike in our system where we vote through the electoral college for our president, they have to, theirs is basically done, and I guess the best way I could describe it is, I'll use our Congress. So it'd be like if the Senate, if the whoever was in control of the Senate, so either the Democrats or Republicans, Democrats being the liberals and Republicans being the conservatives, if one party controlled the Senate, then the person who would become the prime minister would be from that from the majority party in the Senate. So if the Democrats were in power, then the Democrats would select one of their own to be the prime minister. Instead of the people electing them, it's elected through the political process inside of their own, inside of the legislative body. So in England, for example, in the House of Commons, whoever the majority party is in the House of Commons is typically where the prime minister comes from. And so, many people like the way this is set up. What it does, people go, well, gee, they're already inside the bubble of their own political party. What's fair about that? Well, what it does, it just means that the people who represent those folks in England, for example, they do a better job of making sure that their elected representatives who may become the prime minister are who they want to see sit in power. So they still have the ability to influence the outcome, but it's just done by making sure your representatives in the House of Commons in the British parliamentary system are the people you want to see in power. Oh, and let me say one other thing here. So, and then if you don't, if the majority party doesn't have enough votes by themselves, sometimes they will have to form coalitions with another party in order to be for the prime minister to be able to be put in place. So there are checks and balances that make sure there's equity in the system. I would argue even more than in our own political system. Uh, Again, we'll be delving into this a little bit more as we go. Now, again, when we talk about the different divisions of government, of course, we operate under three branches, as do most political systems have an executive branch, meaning they have a presidential parliamentary system. They have a judicial branch, and they have a legislative branch. And within the framework, usually there's checks and balances to make sure that not one branch can have overwhelming power over the other branches. It doesn't mean that they're always equal. Sometimes you can have a very powerful prime minister or a very powerful or popular president that can basically sway or has slightly more power than the other two branches. It just kind of depends on the individuals and the cult of personality and how strong your judiciary is and how strong your legislative body is. Uh, And so, again, under the executive branch, as you can see, there's a head of state and there's a head of government. And again, that's in the dual system. The executive branch in the presidential system is just a head of state. There's no head of government or the president. Let me back up and say another way. There aren't two separate individuals. It's one individual who is the head of state and head of government and under the presidential system, which is called the unified system. And then there's cabinets or ministries, depending on what system you're under, that serve roles the same way. They're representatives. Uh, and then again, their job is to oversee the implementation of laws and and the administration of the country. Um, we talked about the role a little bit just in passing about the number of women who have existed within the executive branch. There have been 22 who currently exist within this framework now around the world. Um, and certainly, there's a lot of room for improvement on that. And hopefully that will happen as time goes. forward. Of course, the process of the role of the judicial branch is to interpret laws. And this is, one of the things that people worry about with our Supreme Court, that instead of just interpreting law, that they have started to overstep their role and responsibilities in dictating the outcome of laws that are relevant, whether it be Roe versus Wade or laws regarding affirmative action, those types of things. Many people have called it what's called judicial overreach, and they feel like the judicial branch has gone a little bit too far in its ability to sort of take on what the legislative bodies is supposed to be charged to do. Uh, so with that, you can see, so on top of interpreting the Constitution and laws, they also administer justice in resolving various disputes. It doesn't have to be criminal, it can also be civil, meaning that it's not criminal. And then they also they're supposed to promote the rule of law and be independent from the political system. Unfortunately, as you see in our system, it's much more problematic than this because, unfortunately, and I think it's an unfortunate thing, the president nominates the Supreme Court justices and appoints federal judges. And to me, that is a huge travesty. No matter, even if you have a great president or don't have a good president, the truth of the matter is it really does impinge on the ability of the system to be able to do what it was intended to do, which is protect the rights of the people. And you're supposed to have an unbiased judiciary to do that. And anytime the president's involved, it really does taint the individual who's leading, because they will basically try to select people who represent only their interest or their issues, and that's not fair to the majority of other people who also deserve to have their ideas and opinions heard, regardless of whether they reside on one side of the political aisle or the other, meaning liberal or conservative. So this is one of the many struggles that we face in our system. Okay. So when we talk about women in the judicial branch, of course, one of the things I will say that we have made progress on is in our Supreme Court, where we have several now women who are justices in our Supreme Court. And we just got our first African American justice. We have a Latina justice, and we have a white justice that are females. Actually two, one conservative, one on the more liberal side. So we have two white females, a black female, and a Hispanic female who reside within our justice. That's 4 out of the 9 justices who are female. So we have found some base of equity there. But again, when you look to the lower levels below the Supreme Court, there has been a historical lack of access to the system for women. And is it changing? I would say yes, slowly, but not nearly enough. Um, and really, for women to step into these roles is important, because to be able to address some of the discriminatory laws within and deal with within the judiciary, be able to make sure that we have equity and diversity within the judicial system. So I assume some of you may be even considering going into law, and maybe considering this may be a role that you want to step into, and you deserve the opportunity to step there, women, if that's something you're interested in doing, without any roadblocks to attain it, if you so choose. Again, the legislative branches usually are most political systems are usually what we call bicameral legislatures. And bicameral simply means that you have two houses within the legislature. Like we have two. We have our House of Representatives and we have our Senate. The Senate is built on basically 2 representatives from all 50 states. So you have 100 senators. And the House of Representatives is based on the size and population of your state, which is broken down into various districts. And so there's about 470 or so legislators in the House of Representatives based on the total number of districts in the country. So those are the 2 houses. And within that framework, the Senate is the more powerful of the 2 houses. But nonetheless, this is how the structure is set up for most countries. And when we talk about the political actors, again, we talk about the folks like the Martin Luther Kings or Cesar Chavez's or Gloria Steinem, who ran the women's movement, or any of the other folks out there who run other movements, whether it be for the LGBTQ plus community or people for disabled groups or These are people who take on and challenge the political system, who are again who reside outside of government. Um, and it also can include political parties, because political parties are nothing more than interest groups, meaning a group of people who have vested interest in political outcomes. Um, and the political party and the houses in Congress are separate entities, even though we have certainly lumped them together, which is one of the greatest concerns of our founding fathers, is that the dangers that would happen when you had partisanship, people inside the legislature who were not serving the interests of the people, but serving the interests of the political parties or their interest group. And that becomes a bigger problem. So the role of legislators, of course, is to basically write the laws. They go through a process, and it becomes a bill when it's going through the process. And an individual or a group of individuals can have an idea that they want to create a law, but so it has to become a bill first, and it goes through a process, what we call a vetting process. It has to go through various committees. It has to be read on the floor once it makes it out of committee. And then once it's signed and once it's approved by one House of Congress, it has to go to the other House of Congress to be approved. And then it goes to the president for signature. And at that point, the bill becomes a law if the president signs it. Um, but again, the role of these particular role they serve is, they're the legislator. They are the committee, serve on various committees within the House of Congress. They are considered or supposed to be public servants, even though I would argue that's problematic these days as well, because there's so much money that is thrown at them that they are frequently pushed to the limits regarding their allegiances to the people versus allegiances to corporate interests and those who give them money to stay in office. They're also members of the political parties, and that becomes also a problem because they're pushed frequently to act based on the ideologies of their political parties, even if it doesn't serve the interests of the masses of people in the country. We have 330 million people approximately, and you're whatever either side of the political party only serves a fraction of either one. So you have to legislate based on the people, regardless of what side of the political aisle they're on, meaning whether they're liberal or conservative. And you can't just think of it in just like it's just about you. So again, as I said, their job is they analyze the laws, they analyze their legislation, they make laws, and then they do the budgeting. The budgets that are set up for how we, for running the country come out of Congress as well. Congress has to approve them before they go to the executive branch. And then there's all the committees that the committees sit on, that the Congress people sit on. So it's required to do committee work, and even within their various committees that the Congress people are assigned to, there's some that are much more uh, uh, powerful, like the Ways and Means Committee, for example, is very powerful. So you have certain committees that are like, if you've been in Congress a long time, you get the real choice, really nice jobs versus the ones that really might suck. um, so it just depends on your time and who you're connected with and your experiences. But again, in the committees, your job is to, hear where you get to deal with various more direct issues and directly address the public as well. And then we talk about, again, also their role within the public servant role. Their job is to reach out to their communities, to their constituents, to see what their issues are, what their needs are. And they need those people because those people are the people that are voting for them. So they have to try to address their needs and their interest. And then as a party member, again, this is where they deal with the political interest of their relevant parties. So, and I could talk about here in the parliamentary system, they have basically parliamentary groups and caucuses. And in our political system, we don't call it a parliamentary groups, but we also have groups and caucuses within our systems as well. They both kind of work the same way. And then we talk about the levels of government. Of course, we have the three levels, which are basically national. They say provincial here. That could be the state government, and then local levels of government. And the three have to work collaboratively to be able to address the needs of all the people in the nation. There's no way for the national government to really be able to address the individual localized needs without the localized leadership being able to dictate and make known those issues to the state level of government that then makes it known to the national level of government. And so, like when you talk about local governments, their purpose is to deal with, basically overseeing the local administration of their community. So in the Imperial Valley, El Centro has its own local government. Raleigh has its own its own government. Calexico has its own government. So there are many areas that have their own governmental systems. There are also some that don't. That don't have their own infrastructure, that don't have their own localized government. They operate under one of the other bigger ones. And then they also, in the localized government, they deal with all the various aspects of education and medical attention and various local policies and local taxes and laws and budgets. So they more directly are involved with citizens, and this is where citizens more directly are involved in the political system, where you directly can go to your city council meeting and talk about various issues that are of concern to you or groups of people and be able to have those conversations. So you can see here basically an example of how the local level, the citizens are interact with the local level government, and how that then by interacting there, they can then impact potentially what happens at the state level, and then from the state level, it goes to the national level. So anyhow, this is basically the framework of government, and which is rooted in the Constitution, and it outlines the structure of our systems, and how the division of governments and roles and responsibilities are set forth for how we operate as a society. Both exist the same way within both the presidential and parliamentary systems. We also discussed again the role of how leaders are elected in that process, and also the roles and responsibilities of those entities that are put into power, as well as, and last but not least, most certainly just as important, the growing role of women in government and what that's going to do to potentially change the outcomes of our systems. Okay, so let me stop there, and I will come back to you in just a moment. With you this last slide, because just to give you an idea of just how extensive in the United States our federal bureaucracy happens to be. So you can see at the very top, the framework begins with the Constitution that breaks down the three branches of government between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. And then you see basically the role of Congress that broken into the two houses, the bicameral legislature, the Senate and the House of Representatives. You see the executive branch, which is called the Executive Office of the President, which includes the President, the Vice President, and the Executive Office of the President, and those offices that reside under this framework. And there are thousands of people that work under the executive branch, under the Office of the President. And then you see over here the judicial branch and the various groups, subgroups of the judicial branch of our legal system. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that under the executive branch is where the federal bureaucracy resides. And this example right here, all the various departments or secretaries of all these different entities that reside that allow the president to do what he or hopefully she does. So you obviously agriculture, you have commerce, defense, education, energy, human services and health, homeland security, and housing and urban development, along with interior, justice, labor, Department of State, transportation and treasury, and veteran affairs. Under each one of those is a tremendous infrastructure as well, and then which there's not enough room on this paper to do this on this slide. And then below there you have all the various independent agencies that exist, and there's tons of them, including like things as simple as the U.S. Post Office, but also the International Atomic Energy Agency, Federal Aviation Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission. There are lots of entities that are part of what we call independent agencies and government corporations that exist under the executive branch of government. And it's an extensive bureaucracy who is charged with basically exercising the needs of the 330 million people that exist within the United States. So I wanted to share that with you as we end this particular week of discussion on the building blocks of government. And I will see you for the last one, week 6, next week. Thanks a lot, everyone.